This is the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels like they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across the table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey all, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. If you joined us in this journey during the last month, welcome. So my promise with this podcast and with my writing is to give an honest, unfiltered look at my thought patterns and behaviors during my own 12-year battle with alcoholism. My hope is that this work can be used as a resource for those with loved ones who are struggling, or that the alcoholic can use this to connect with someone who is one of them, but has found a solution. So I'm going to start the next portion of podcast, and I'm going to focus on one aspect of recovery that I clung to, even weakly at times, and that is hope. Hope for you who has a loved one in your life who you feel like is struggling and you're struggling to help, and also hope for the addict or alcoholic that there is a solution. For those of you who are listening who are not addicts or alcoholics, the frustration, the pain and suffering that you go through having a loved one who is struggling with addiction and seemingly will not listen is exhausting. I can see that reflecting back on my own story with family and friends who desperately tried to help when I was battling this alone. The alcoholic or the addict seemingly will not listen. They won't learn. It seems like they don't want to improve. You beg them to use yourself, your friendship, your partnership, relationship, love, anything that you can think of as motivation for change. Yet they don't. I just want to stress this pattern is normal. It happened to me. It has happened to countless addicts and alcoholics who have found a way to live a meaningful life with their addiction. And this is the part of the podcast where we're going to turn to the Alcoholics Anonymous book. And the Alcoholics Anonymous book was written in the 30s. And on first pass, it was actually written for males. But, and I only say that because that, as you'll see, some of the language choice in this first edition that I'm going to read from lends itself towards that writing. But the book was written as a means to communicate a solution that was discovered for alcoholism specifically, but then which was applied broadly to addiction. And so the passage that I want to start with is on page 18 of what's commonly called the Big Book, but it's just titled Alcoholics Anonymous. So, page 18 to the book, quote, highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So I just want to layer on my perspective and story onto these two paragraphs. In my time in my 12-year battle with alcoholism, I saw at least 5 professional therapists or psychologists when I was struggling alone. I either did it or I did it for the purposes of really family and friends and at the urging of family and friends. But I was never committed to the idea that those professionals could get me better. And during my sessions with them, I either didn't divulge the entirety of my struggle, like I would hide how much I was drinking. I would hide even the fact that alcohol was part of my life and part of the problem. And I would just outright lie to get out of the engagement. I had this ability to create this story arc that I knew a therapist was looking for. And so I would come in to the engagement or the relationship, this broken man. And over the course of a few weeks and months, I would craft this story of improvement and like new insight and just new perspective on the world. But it was a lie. It was a facade. And I did it just to be able to end the engagement with the therapist or psychologist. The one professional therapist that called me out for being an alcoholic, I basically fired them the next week. I refused to go back and see them because I didn't like that perspective. I did not like that fact being brought up and put right in front of me, and I did not have the ability to address it at that time. Additionally, I had family and friends approach me numerous times throughout my battle with alcoholism about my struggle, asking me, Kyle, do you think there's a problem? And, is it alcoholism? Is it alcohol abuse? And we just kind of danced around the idea because I would constantly push back on it. And I refused to believe that I was someone that could have this problem and could be an alcoholic. And so I lashed out and I struck back at them. And some of them walked away from me, and rightly so. They did not deserve that in their lives. And then it just so happened that my first few hours in rehab was over the lunch hour. And I sat down at a table and started talking with an individual and suddenly realized that I had finally found someone who spoke my language and who knew and lived through similar struggles. He shared with me and I shared with him. And even though our backgrounds were incredibly different and our drug of choice wasn't even the same, he was honest with me and I was honest with him. And suddenly I realized I could see myself in him. And all of a sudden I knew, one, I didn't have to be so hard on myself and think that I was crazy for thinking the thoughts that would go through my mind, for behaving the way that I wound up behaving. Secondly, I am not alone. The third thought, if other people have figured this out, why not me? And that ultimately led to the feeling that this is possible. There is hope. Now, as with almost everything in life, you cannot give to others what you do not have yourself. This is a really easy concept to connect with when it comes to, assets or things in life. It's a little more difficult to parse out, especially in this day and age that we live in with digital connectivity and no real sense of a relationship or understanding of, the person on the other side of the screen or on the other side of the microphone with a podcast about what they actually have when it comes to a mindset or thought pattern. So it's a little more difficult to connect with this idea that you cannot give to others what you do not have. But whether it's a hard asset or an idea or perception of how to live your life, the concept is the exact same. And so the incredible potential and influence that an alcoholic or addict has who does not crave or use their drug of choice anymore is unbelievable, especially to someone who is struggling and who has battled alone for far too long. There are people who have figured out how to live a meaningful life as an addict, as an alcoholic. And my hope and my vision is to deliver these concepts and ideas. I feel the most important next steps to take with this work is to instill hope. To go through Chapter 2 in the big book in Alcoholics Anonymous, titled, There is a Solution. To instill a sense of hope in you as a loved one of an addict, or to instill hope in the addict or alcoholic themselves. Then, finally, after covering Chapter 2, we're going to do a deep dive into the namesake of this entire body of work, Chapter 3. So for those of you who have been wondering, Chapter 3 Stigma is named for Chapter 3 in the Alcoholics Anonymous book. Chapter 3 really dives into and defines what an addict or alcoholic is. It holds a mirror up to the alcoholic to look back at themselves and say, yes, this is me. I want to say, if you desire more and you just want to dive in and read this content, don't wait. Simply search Chapter 2 Big Book or Chapter 2 AA or Chapter 3 AA, and you will find all of the writing available. It's a publicly available record and document at this point. So the only thing I'm going to add on top of this content that I think is so key and so important is just the layering on of my own story and some of my own ideas and thoughts about the work. So you can go right to it if you want. These chapters aren't incredibly long. I want to say something along the lines of 15 to 20 pages each. But they might be the most important literature and writing on the concept of alcoholism and addiction. So I'm very much looking forward to diving into the book and delivering this next portion of the work and focus of Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. Thank you all for following along. That's all I've got. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others or give us a rating on your channel of choice. My hope is that my story can help others in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life that they feel could be bettered. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. I cannot solve your problems for you, but I can listen. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and life is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you have to endure. Until next time.